The American Civil War started and ended on the property of the same civilian. In July of 1861, a cannonball shot through the kitchen of Wilmer McLean's house. This was one of the first shots fired during the first major battle of the war. Now, McLean had actually given up his residence to be used as a Confederate headquarters. This on its own wasn't all that remarkable, however the war was not yet done with McLean. McLean moved his family over 100 miles away, in part to escape the war. He had a bit of wealth, and at this new property, he thought they'd be more safe. However, in April of 1865, almost 4 years after that initial battle, McLean was once again approached by the Confederate command. This time, he would temporarily give up his new home, as its parlor would be the location of the Confederate surrender, where Robert E. Lee met with Ulysses S. Grant. After the surrender, McLean's house was basically ransacked for souvenirs by those present. It's often said in some variation that the war began in McLean's kitchen and ended in his parlor. It had been just a normal day for a small Kentucky community. That is, until it began to rain meat from the sky. Although the skies had been clear, pieces of flesh were now falling all over the ground and getting stuck atop fences. It appeared to be red meat, like beef or lamb, and most chunks were 2 by 2 inches, with the largest being 4 by 4 inches. This is what would become known as the Kentucky meat shower. But what caused meat to fall from the heavens? Well, eventually, various samples were examined, with 2 determined to be lung tissue, 2 to be cartilage, and 3 to be muscle. The exact type of red meat, though, has always been a mystery. The most plausible explanation that could be had for this phenomenon was the vulture theory, where a kettle of vultures, by the way that's the name for a group of vultures that are flying, had been startled by something as they took flight. The vultures regurgitated their meals, vomiting down the meat onto a poor Kentucky woman's property. It isn't uncommon for vultures to empty the contents of their stomachs as a defensive means for a faster escape from a perceived threat. This theory would explain the variety in the meat samples. Perhaps it was venison or beef, as well as why it seemingly fell from the sky. It seems to be our best guess into the mystery of the Kentucky meat shower. So how do you expel an invading army when they sit camped atop a hill, blasting you with arrows if you attempt to attack? Well, this is the predicament Chinese General Che Shao found himself in 623. A bit of an outside-of-the-box thinker. He thought perhaps the best way to attack this fortified force was not with his own force, but something a bit different. As the story goes, the invaders soon noticed figures atop a nearby hill. They were 2 erotic dancers, accompanied by musicians that had been sent by the Chinese general. At first, those closest to the dancers began to watch, but soon much of the camp was enthralled by the song and dance. However, this distraction had left them open to an attack by the surrounding army, who slaughtered some 500 of them and expelled them from their lands. During the Spanish-American War, the USS Charleston was sent to capture the remote island of Guam, a territory in Spanish possession. The American cruiser had expected to be met with resistance from the island's fortresses and began firing upon one of the forts with their own cannons, resulting in no damage or casualties. However, they were not met with return fire. In fact, all they were met with was curious civilians gathering at the port to welcome the American ship. When the 2 sides met, the Spanish officials apologized for being unable to return their salute. You see, they were unaware the 2 sides were at war, believing the Americans were friendly and merely saluting the fort. Being isolated, Guam had not yet received the news of the declaration of war between Spain and the United States from a few months earlier. Upon being informed of the conflict by the Americans, the governor would surrender the island, as the United States captured Guam without battle or casualties. In 75 BC, Cilician pirates captured a young Roman nobleman, intending to hold him for ransom. When the price was set at 20 talents, the nobleman laughed at this paltry sum, as they did not realize they had captured the soon-to-be great Julius Caesar. He demanded the ransom be increased to 50 talents, and he sent his followers to collect the payment. In the meantime, though, for 38 days he remained more so their guest than a prisoner. Caesar would join in games with them, tell them to quiet down while he slept, force them to listen to his poems, often insulting them if they weren't impressed, and of course, threatening to have them all executed once he was freed. The usually barbaric pirates were quite amused with what they perceived to be playful jokes from their eccentric captive. When the ransom arrived and Caesar set free, he did not immediately go back to his usual business, but instead raised a small naval force and then returned to the pirates. He plundered their possessions and took his former captors as prisoners. Upon return, however, the governor seemed hesitant to punish the pirates, so once again Caesar took matters into his own hands. He took the pirates out of prison and had them all crucified, just as he had often told them he would. The Spolia Opima, or rich spoils in English, was the most prestigious war trophy a Roman general could achieve. However, doing so was an extremely rare and difficult thing to do, as it required a Roman commander to slay the opposing enemy commander in single combat and strip him of his armor, with the armor becoming the trophy. It then needed to be consecrated at the temple of Jupiter Feretrius. Although many sought to attain it, only a few were supposedly able to do so, with just one instance being seen as credible by most historians. Roman commander Marcus Claudius Marcellus achieved this honor in 223 BC during a battle against the Gauls. Moments before the battle, he is said to have vowed to consecrate the most beautiful set of armor to Jupiter Feretrius, hoping to receive armor that he could dedicate to the god. Moments later, the king of the Gauls spotted the Roman commander and made his way to him. And due to the gleaming armor he wore, Marcellus knew his prayer had been answered. The two rode towards each other, with Marcellus knocking the king from his horse and quickly finishing him off with a thrust of his spear. The Roman commander then removed the extravagant armor from his body, as the battle was won. For the armor to truly be considered Spolia Opima, however, custom called that a ritual needed to be performed, with Marcellus cutting down an oak tree and strapping the armor around it. He then rode through the city of Rome, with the armor displayed for all, before taking it to the temple of Jupiter Feretrius as an offering to be consecrated. While likely exaggerated to some degree, Marcellus is often seen as the most credible instance of the Spolia Opima. The RMS Carmania was an ocean liner that had been converted into an armed merchant cruiser for the British Navy at the beginning of the First World War. Now outfitted for battle, the warship patrolled off the coast of South America and the Atlantic. Near Trindade Island, she spotted a ship in the distance and sailed to meet it. When the two ships were in range of each other, the Carmania was face to face with the Carmania. No doubt a surreal sight for the crew to behold. So this doppelganger was actually the SMS Cap Trafalgar, a German ocean liner that, like the Carmania, had been repurposed for the war. However, it had also been altered and painted to closely resemble the Carmania. This was done in the hopes that the Cap Trafalgar could fool British ships into thinking it was indeed the real thing. Unfortunately for her though, she was now face to face with the actual Carmania. What resulted was the first battle between former ocean liners. Despite the fake Carmania being the faster ship with longer ranged guns, the real Carmania was able to defeat and sink her clone. Like father, like son is not a phrase one would use to describe George Morrison and his son, Jim Morrison. You may recognize Jim Morrison as the frontman for The Doors, a rock icon that led a rebellious lifestyle. His father, however, had taken a much different path in life. George Morrison had a decorated military career, but is perhaps best known for being the naval commander during the Gulf of Tonkin incident, an early clash between US and North Vietnamese boats and aircraft. The same incident that led to the United States' more direct involvement in the Vietnam War. So while Jim Morrison was one of the great icons of counterculture, his father, George Morrison, was actually directly involved in the event that kickstarted one of America's most unpopular wars. The Mongols had besieged the city of Caffa, but plague thinned their numbers to the point they were forced to abandon the siege. However, they would not leave in peace. In an early instance of biological warfare, the Mongols catapulted the plague-ridden bodies into the city to spread death to its inhabitants. The rotting corpses quickly piled up in the city as those inside tried to dump the bodies into the sea. However, it seems infection soon spread. Some inhabitants fled the city by ship and made their way to Mediterranean ports. However, with them came infection. The extent of the account is debated, but it's possible this event played some minor role in the spread of the Black Death soon to come to Europe. Stirling Castle was the last stronghold for the Scottish holding out against English subjugation, and King Edward I of England, nicknamed the Hammer of the Scots, was determined to not only see its downfall, but to make a warning out of its futile resistance. The English used a vast assemblage of siege engines, including catapults and Greek fire. Still, the siege lasted for months, as the castle was well fortified and positioned against attack. However, while the men inside held out, the men outside were busy constructing something truly destructive. The king had ordered what's said to be the largest trebuchet ever to be constructed, taking 50 workers and 5 master carpenters several months to complete. Named the Warwolf, it could supposedly hurl projectiles up to 300 pounds. When disassembled, it had to be transported by 30 wagons. When the Scots saw the latter stages of Warwolf's construction, they attempted to surrender to the English king, but at this point, Edward wanted to see the devastating ability of his new weapon, so he refused. The massive power behind the trebuchet's launch of the projectile is said to have wrecked the curtain wall of the castle. And once Edward was satisfied, having proven his might to those who dare resist, he finally allowed the defenders to surrender. There are few records of this alleged behemoth of a siege engine, but if there is some truth to it, then Warwolf would be one of the most intimidating weapons of its time. The name Kushim may be the earliest known name to be recorded and written down. Found on several Sumerian clay tablets, believed to date back sometime between 3400 BC and 3000 BC. They detail barley transactions and seem to be signed Kushim. Now, whether Kushim is an individual, a title, or even the name of some organization is not known. However, if it is indeed the name of a person, it could be the first recorded name that we know of from history. And it was no king or famed warrior, rather someone more akin to an accountant. It's interesting to think about how this individual may have been relatively insignificant in the grand scheme of things, or perhaps even during his time, yet his name may have just lived on into ours. Let me know some other strange historical facts and events in the comments. Thanks for watching.